You set an alarm last night. You had a schedule, a list, somewhere to be by a certain time. And underneath all of that, underneath the calendar and the commute and the inbox, there is a part of your brain that has been running the same basic software for 200,000 years. What was that software designed to do? What did a day actually look like before any of this existed? The answer is not what you were taught, and it will change the way you see almost everything you do before noon. Start with the assumption most people carry around without ever questioning it. The assumption that ancient humans spent every waking moment in a desperate scramble for survival. Hunting, running, barely making it. Popular culture built this image carefully. The hunched figure clutching a spear, eyes wide, always on the edge of death. Anthropologists have spent decades dismantling it. The reality is stranger, slower, and in some ways far more interesting than the myth. Researchers like Marshall Sahlins made a case in the 1960s that hunter-gatherers were, in his words, the original affluent society. Not because they had more, because they wanted less. And the data behind that idea is difficult to argue with. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, the San people of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Ache of Paraguay, consistently show the same pattern. Adults in these societies spend somewhere between 3 and 5 hours per day on what we would call work. Acquiring food, making tools, maintaining camp. 3 to 5 hours. Then they stop. The rest of the day belongs to something else entirely. What does that something else look like? Mostly, it looks like talking. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner spent decades living with and studying the Jew/Hoansi San people. She recorded thousands of hours of their conversations and published her findings in a landmark 2014 study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. During daylight hours, conversations were practical. Who would gather where? What needed repairing? Social tensions that needed resolving. But something shifted when the sun went down and the fire came up. At night, more than 80% of conversations shifted to storytelling, narrative, myth, imagination. People sat around fire and talked about things that weren't there. People who weren't present. Events that had already happened or hadn't happened yet. This, Wiessner argued, was not idle time. This was the engine of human culture. Language expanding. Memory being stored in shared story. Empathy being built between people who needed to trust one another to survive. Your ancient ancestor was not staring at a screen. But the fire did something remarkably similar to what a screen does. It extended the social day. It gave people a reason to stay together after dark. It held their attention. Anthropologist Wrangham at Harvard has argued that cooking over fire, which humans may have begun doing as far back as 1 million years ago, fundamentally reorganized the human day. Cooking made food more digestible and more calorie-dense. That meant less time chewing, less gut needed to process raw material, and more energy available for the brain. The hearth became the center of social life, and sitting around it became one of the most ancient and defining things a human being could do. So the early part of the day looked like this. You wake near dawn not from an alarm but from light. You are probably not alone. You sleep in a group, close together for warmth and safety. The camp begins to stir. Someone tends to the fire that was kept low through the night. There is no formal breakfast in the sense you know. People eat what is available, leftover food from the evening before, or nothing, or a handful of something pulled from a nearby plant. The concept of 3 scheduled meals is a surprisingly recent invention, shaped largely by the Industrial Revolution and the factory clock. Your ancient body did not expect food on a schedule. It expected food when food existed. Mid-morning, the day's real work begins. And even calling it work misunderstands what it felt like. Foraging, gathering roots, berries, nuts, tubers, eggs, insects, was not monotonous. It required extraordinary knowledge. The San people carried detailed mental maps of thousands of plant species, their seasonal cycles, their locations, their medicinal uses. This knowledge took years to acquire and was constantly being refined. A child learning to forage was not doing something simple. They were building a cognitive library that would take a lifetime to complete. In terms of raw information processing, it rivaled anything we ask of ourselves today. Hunting, when it happened, was not a daily event. Large game hunts could be rare, sometimes only a few times a month. The Hadza, studied extensively by Frank Marlowe at Cambridge, showed that men returned from hunts empty-handed more often than not. This was not failure. It was the rhythm. Hunting required patience, reading terrain, tracking, understanding animal behavior at a level most modern humans cannot imagine. And when a hunt succeeded, the return to camp was an event. Meat was shared, not always equally, not without social negotiation, but shared. the obligation to share, was powerful and enforced. Hoarding was not a strategy that worked in a group where everyone depended on everyone else and where tomorrow's hunter might be you. By midday, in hot climates, the day paused. Rest was not laziness, it was physiology. The human body under equatorial sun needed to reduce exertion during peak heat. Napping, resting in shade, casual conversation, these filled the middle of the day. Jerome Siegel at UCLA studied sleep patterns in non-industrialized societies in Tanzania, Namibia, and Bolivia, and found that these groups did not sleep 8 hours continuously. They slept shorter periods at night and often rested briefly during the day. The rigid 8-hour block, the alarm clock, the guilt of an afternoon nap, these are modern impositions on a body that never agreed to them. The afternoon brought more gathering, more socializing, more movement. Children were not separated into age-grouped classrooms. They played together across ages, and play was inseparable from learning. They watched adults work and imitated what they saw. They practiced skills through games that looked nothing like school but accomplished everything school tries to do. A 6-year-old and a 12-year-old playing together at the edge of a camp were learning negotiation, empathy, risk assessment, and practical skill at the same time. And then the fire came up. Evening was when the social fabric tightened. This was when disputes were settled, not through punishment systems, but through conversation, humor, and something anthropologists call leveling mechanisms. If someone in the group was becoming too dominant, too aggressive, too self-important, the group pushed back, through teasing, through mockery, through deliberate social pressure that kept hierarchies flat. Hierarchical dominance of the kind seen in other primates was not tolerated. This is not speculation. It is documented across dozens of hunter-gatherer societies. The egalitarianism of ancient human groups was not an accident. It was actively maintained every single evening around the fire. Music happened here too. Singing, rhythmic percussion, dancing. Not as performance as participation. Every person in the group was expected to join. There was no audience and no stage. This distinction matters because it changes what music does to the brain. Neuroscientist Robin Dunbar at Oxford has studied the role of music and synchronized movement in social bonding. His research suggests that group singing and rhythmic movement trigger the same endorphin release as physical touch. They literally make people feel closer, more trusting, more connected to each other. Music was not entertainment. It was social glue. It was medicine. And your ancient ancestors applied it nightly. Sleep came gradually, not suddenly. The fire dimmed. Conversations slowed. People drifted in and out of sleep in overlapping patterns, meaning that at almost any point in the night, some member of the group was probably awake. This is not insomnia. Researchers believe this may have been a feature, not a flaw. A survival mechanism ensuring the group was never entirely unconscious at once. And then dawn came again, and the whole quiet, social, surprisingly unhurried cycle began again. Here is what makes this strange and worth sitting with. The human brain you use to read this was built by that day, by 3 to 5 hours of skilled, purposeful work, by long stretches of unscheduled time, by firelit storytelling and shared meals and music that was never meant to be listened to alone, by sleep that followed light and not a clock, by relationships that were not chosen from a curated profile but lived in, daily, without exit. Your schedule today looks almost nothing like that. And somewhere in the gap between what your brain was built for and what you are asking it to do, that gap is where a great deal of modern restlessness lives. Tonight, when you set your alarm, you are doing something your ancestors never did. You are telling your body when to stop. It never needed to be told. It already knew.